maybe old people in positions of leadership in the House and the Congress and the Senate, maybe we shouldn't have them there. Maybe there should be a cap before you're too old. If you look at the leadership right now in Latin America, if you look at the leadership across Asia, look at Xi Jinping, you're talking about powerful people, largely men, who are old and of a generation that is not the modern day digital generation. Because CIA has this really horrible ad campaign going on. They have this push in their advertising right now that's like highlighting diversity and woke culture, all that stuff.
Last night, we're putting the kids to bed, and our 6-year-old makes a joke where she uses the word sex because she doesn't really fully understand.
That 6-year-old, she talks about sex so much.
I know, but it's not that she talks about sex. She makes these jokes. She hears the word and she, something sexy, or you're sexy in your butt, or like she doesn't really understand what it means. But our son, who's 10, made a comment of, like, that joke doesn't make any sense because sex is for making babies. And then our daughter was like, oh, yeah, sex is only for making babies. And I found myself standing there mumbling under my breath, well, that's not exactly true.
That wasn't that under your breath. I heard you correct them. And I was like, what kind of hornet's nest are you trying to step into right now?
Because our son is 10. Yeah. And when I was a kid, my best friends in middle school, I had 2 best friends in middle school, and they both started having sex at 11, right? And we homeschool our kids, so they won't be exposed in the same way, but they will be exposed to other kids. And I'm definitely on board with the philosophy of, like, you have to teach your kids the right thing before somebody else teaches them the wrong thing, right? So in my mind, I'm like, our son is 10. He's going to be entering puberty in the next few years. Yeah. We are going to have that hard conversation with him. Not hard for him, hard for us.
Hard for us. It will be hard. Well, that's a good call. Will it even be hard for him? Or is he just going to be like, what's up, Mom? What's up, Dad?
Yeah. I'm pretty certain if it's me, he's going to be like, Mom, you're getting too scientific. But it's an important conversation to have with the kids. And, we've talked before about how I have a really strong filter. And in my family, we don't generally have hard conversations. But ever since being with you, we've made it this really important concept that in life and relationships, you have to have the hard conversations. You don't get anywhere without having those.
Yeah, and a hard conversation is an uncomfortable conversation.
Yes.
It's a conversation that most people don't have. There's not like a precedent for hard conversations. They're just conversations that are needed,
yes,
but they're uncomfortable.
Right, and so they're avoided.
Yeah.
Right? They're the avoided conversation. Anytime you find yourself thinking, this is bothering me, or I should talk about this, or this is some really, an important conversation I should have. And then the next step you find yourself avoiding it, that's a hard conversation. Yeah. And that's even more reason why you should have it.
For me growing up, we never had hard conversations.
Really?
And it was really, yes, we never had hard conversations. What we had were everybody would avoid the issue until somebody was so frustrated from the avoidance that they like melted down and then had this hostile confrontation. And that was basically life with my mom. Life with my mom was avoid, pretend everything's happy, and tip over too far into the angry side and hostile, angry conversation, and then say all sorts of things that you regret saying, and then pretend like those things never happened until stress builds up enough that everybody has another hostile confrontational. And you see it with my mom still. Yeah. Like when we are with my mom and I remind her of something traumatic from childhood and she's like, that never happened. I don't know what you're talking about.
And my family also, stuffed it down deep, but then it didn't normally explode. Sometimes I think I can remember 2 times where my dad exploded with some kind of repressive anger. But otherwise, in my family, what happens is 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, something comes up and you're like, you've been holding on to that a really long time. So, when I was thinking about, because I dinged awake this morning thinking, when and how am I going to have this conversation with our son, right? like, is 10 too young? Should I wait? Like, what's the right time? And it made me think of how case officers develop their assets, because I feel like the same skills that case officers use are skills that are important for parenting as well. So one of those is just being a good listener, right? And being a good listener in the context of being able to assess the right time. So a case officer is trying to assess the right time for a pitch, right? To pitch to the person like, hey, I want you to spy for me, right?
It's a big pitch. It's a big pitch.
And it's a big pitch. So it takes lots of time where you're listening to them and putting time into them until you get to that point where you assess that they are comfortable with you and they're open with you, right? With kids, it's the same thing. You need to spend all this time listening to them and assessing along the way their openness to you so you can figure out that right moment of like, we're going to have the talk today.
So, and let's be clear, because, being a good listener in culture, in pop culture, that means something completely different than what we're talking about.
Right. It's not passive.
It's not empathetic. Yeah. You're not trying to be a good listener so you can be a good person. You're not trying to be a good listener so you can be a good friend. In this case, we're not trying to be good listeners so we can be good parents. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to be proactive listeners so that we can find the right time to introduce a difficult concept, a difficult topic.
Yeah.
It's very operationally driven, and that's how case officers use it, right? Good listener, I mean, that's something you'll get from a yoga class. You'll get that from like an influencer online who's trying to sell hair products. And who knows what?
It could apply to the other things, but definitely in this context, the hard conversation context, it is not those things.
Right.
Yeah.
It is a process by which you listen so that you can assess, to your point.
Yeah.
You can gain enough evidence, verbal evidence, nonverbal evidence, life experience, context. You can assess when is the right time to bring up a topic. And it's funny because we're talking about when to bring up the topic of sex with our 10-year-old homeschooled son.
Yeah.
But the reason we're having this conversation is not because of him. No. It's because of his 6-year-old sister who makes sex jokes like she's a 35-year-old man. Right? So it's interesting because we're assessing for one person, but we know that this train is coming.
Yeah.
But we don't, not because of him. If we were to just assess from him, it's years out. Yeah. He doesn't talk about sex. He doesn't show much of an interest in sex. Yeah. He still thinks kissing is gross.
Yeah.
Right? He talks about wanting to marry a nice girl and have a family and have kids and be a dad himself. So there's certainly evidence that he's a heterosexual kid.
Yeah.
But it's not like he talks about his sexuality at all.
No.
It is interesting. Like, is it going to happen all at once? Like, is it going to be 10-year-old is cute and 11 years old is cute and 12-year-old is what? Now we're talking to like a horn dog. Like, what's it going to be like?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, and it's not, just like puberty itself, right? It's not standard. You can't standardize these things. So the only way to approach it is to make these constant assessments along the way, to really be paying attention.
Now, when case officers assess, when field officers assess an asset, and it's not just case officers. Anybody who comes in contact with a case in CIA, they're all asked to weigh in on their assessment.
Right.
Even the analyst who's only reading the intel report, who never meets the person, is still asked to assess the case. So what are some of the data points that you use when you're assessing a person, a case, an individual, a situation?
So, we're always looking for case progression, right? Because that's what matters. So we're looking to make sure that the person is comfortable with the case officer, that the person is being honest in the things because some people are looking to be spies, right? Some people are putting false information out there because they want to be recruited and paid for information that they don't actually have access to. So we're looking, for are they being honest with the case officer? Do they trust the case officer? Do they have vulnerabilities in those situations that we could, or motivations that we could, leverage when the time comes to slowly build them up to a point where they are comfortable giving us the secrets that we're looking for.
So this idea of progress over time,
Yeah.
you want them on day 5 to be more open, more cooperative, more compliant than they were on day 0.
Absolutely.
And it's funny because one of the things that I was going to say is we're looking for consistency. Consistency in progression, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But also consistency in areas of interest, consistency in vulnerabilities, consistency in levels of interest.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating because when you apply that same concept in espionage, that all sounds sexy, right? Let's find the nuclear scientist who drinks too much, right?
Has
Who's
a
working
gambling
on
problem.
and he's working on a nuclear missile program, and then let's see that case progress.
Yeah.
It's way less sexy, but even more impactful in many ways when you apply it to your family, to your kids, right? Or to dating, for crying out loud.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Do you see progression?
Yes.
Do you see consistency, right? Do you see the promise of future growth? Because if you don't see those things during your assessment over time, not during your instantaneous assumption,
Right.
Because assessment and assumption often get confused.
Yeah.
We're not saying what do you assume about the person. We're saying what do you assess from actual evidence that you collect in your interactions with them. And do you see that progression, that consistency, and that value?
Yeah. And it's, I mean, if you talk about the dating world, it's more than just the first 3 dates, because maybe you have your amazing first 3 dates and you have drinks and you're having a great time and everything is wonderful. It's really more like on date 10, right? Like have your last 10 dates progressed to a point where you feel like that person trusts you, where you feel like that person listens to you and you are giving them the kind of feedback that shows that you were listening to them. So I know, when we started dating, the first, we met at work, we met at orientation, and then the first time you came to my apartment was maybe like 2 months after we had met. And the thing you brought me the first time you came to my apartment to visit was a bag of cherries, because I had mentioned to you that it was cherry season and cherries were my favorite because they were only available when they're in season. And
that was the reason I told you. That was the reason I told you. But I mean, come on, like the first time I went to a girl's apartment, I bring cherries. There's so much immature innuendo there, right?
Well, unfortunately for you, my mom was staying with me at
the time. That's true. It didn't work. It didn't work well. She ate the cherries, which was really, really uncomfortable to me.
But then over time, you showed consistently that you had been paying attention to things that I had said. And just little, acts of service or little gifts that you would give me built that trust for me that, oh, Andy's paying attention. Andy cares. That's how I equated it in my mind, right?
And I did care, and I was paying attention. I thought you were super interesting.
Oh, that's
and I
very
thought
sweet.
you were super fun, and you were an awesome escape from all things CIA, even though you were still a CIA thing too, right? It's funny because you give this very sweet example, and when you were explaining this, where my mind went was to a very raunchy example.
Of course.
And I've got to say it because I know I'm not alone. I was always the guy who stayed with the wrong girl because the sex was good. And that goes, talk about assessment, right? Yeah. Like, she looked good naked. She was good in bed. She was dumb as a hammer in public. She was not the kind of person you want to introduce your mom to. Yeah. Your friends all looked at you like, why are you wasting your time? Like, you could do so much better. But for you, as the dude, 28, or not 28, I was with you. I was past it by then. Yeah. 24, 25, 21, right? I didn't want to work hard. I definitely didn't want to work as hard as it takes to find a true life partner. Yeah. So the lazy way was to find the good enough partner. And, there's a lot of guys out there who do that. We work just hard enough to find a partner who's good enough. Yeah. And unfortunately, what I think I find with a lot of people now that we're in our early 40s is that what was good enough to them when they were in their 20s is not good enough anymore. Yeah. And that's why you find them moving on to second marriages, or you find them going through their first round of divorce, which is strange to be at a season in our lives where we're being invited to second weddings instead of first weddings. Yeah. But that's where my mind went, because that's a failure to assess. Right. I was failing to assess the situation. There was no progress. Yep. There was no growth. There was no, outside of the consistency of being good in bed, the other thing that was consistent was all bad. Yeah. Bad conversation, not enjoyable times in public, no approval from my social circles.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't tuned in. I wasn't doing a proper assessment.
Right. And that's if you were looking for your assessment to be, will this be a long-term partner, right? Because if your assessment is, will this person meet my needs for, the next 6 months, then maybe that was a proper assessment you were making.
Way to validate my bad single bachelor decisions.
Well, I have my own decisions too that will remain locked away in a closet.
But man, could you imagine those, talk about hard conversations. If I would have had any one of those bad fits and I would have had an honest conversation with them, it would have gone horribly wrong. So that's why we find 1,001 excuses to break up with boyfriends and girlfriends. The whole "it's not you, it's me" thing is like the worst breakup plan ever, but we all use it because we're just trying to avoid the hard conversation. Because it really is you.
I do remember a conversation in our history where it was definitely a "it's not me, it's you" conversation.
That's true. You want to bring it up? We'll jump right into that because that may have been our first hard conversation.
Hard conversation. So, when you broke up with me.
Yep. After you had been bringing me dinner, too many second plates of dinner.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. We were dating. I don't think we were living together. Were we living together?
No, we had been dating maybe 6 weeks or so.
Oh, yeah. So very early on.
It was very early
and
on. Yeah, it didn't take you long to make that assessment.
I was very into you because you were smart, you were bold, you were confident, you were intelligent, you were capable, you were a strong woman. I really respect strong women. I feel like the world is a better place because of strong women, right? And for sure, I was raised in a household full of strong women. So it was a very natural thing for me to be attracted to your strong woman nature. And when we were dating early on, and you were a strong woman in public, but then whenever we got in private, watching a movie, eating dinner, going on a date, you were like demure.
I was the little woman in private.
You were the little woman. The big woman, the hashtag lady boss in public, and you were like Little House on the Prairie in private. And I was like, I didn't like this. This consistency is not working for me.
Yeah. And it was because, I'd come from a family where my female role models did everything for the men. And I had just come out of a long-term relationship where that was the dynamic, and that was the dynamic with his parents as well. And so that was the example that I was emulating these women who I adored. But it wasn't really me, and you knew that. And what I think is so powerful about that hard conversation was it was a hard conversation. I was completely heartbroken. I didn't fully... I knew you were unhappy, but I don't think I fully knew your feelings for me at the time because it was so early on.
I didn't know my feelings for you at the time. Yeah.
And so, but what happened was because you took the step, right? If you had not had that conversation with me, if you had avoided it, we would have continued down the same path and you would have continued to have been unhappy, and maybe we would have broken up eventually because of it, or maybe we would have continued and then you just would have not had the partner that you wanted. I wouldn't have grown. But because you had that hard conversation with me, we broke up for quite a while. Yeah. And I took that conversation as an assessment of myself, and I grew. So I took all of that time and all of that feedback that you gave me, as hard as it was to hear, and I ruminated on it, and I figured out, what can I do to make these changes, right? At first, I was very... at first I pushed back. You remember, right?
You're jumping to the end of the story, right? Because I saw that you were being weak in private and strong in public. And then the actual conversation that you keep referencing, that's why I'm saying you're jumping to the end.
Oh, yeah.
No one knows the conversation.
Oh, sorry, everybody.
We were having dinner. We were watching a movie. We were having dinner.
Yeah.
You brought me dinner, like you have done 100 times before. And I asked you multiple times, like, don't bring me my dinner. Like, I'll get my own happy ass up and I'll go get my own food. In fact, sit down and let me bring you dinner. But you kept bringing me dinner. And then I think the straw that broke the camel's back was we're watching this movie. You had just sat down to your own dinner and I was mostly done with mine, and I was talking about how good the food was, and then you didn't even take a bite of your own food. You then stood right back up and came over and got my plate and took it away to go get me more food. And I was like, I cannot handle this. Yep. And that was when I told you, I was like, this is not what I'm interested in. I do not want a partner who's going to wait on me. You're not a waitress. Yeah. You're a partner, right? We're supposed to do this thing together. And I feel like right now you're putting yourself second. And how are we ever going to be on the same page if I put you first and you put yourself second? Yeah. How are we ever going to see eye to eye on this, right? Like, let me take care of you. You can take care of you. And then anything that's left over, we can use that to focus on me, because I don't need what you need. I'm not a needy person. I don't need attention. I don't have anxiety. I don't have low energy. I'm not an introvert, right? I have excess resources in these areas. So let me invest them in you. I don't need you going into debt with your resources. Yeah. I don't need you, exacerbating your anxiety. I don't need you running your energy levels even lower by trying to pretend to be this little Latina woman for her big Latina boy.
Taking care of my man.
That's not what I need, right? When I need you to take care of me, it'll count. And you've taken care of me a lot in our life. Yeah. I've been super sick and you've taken care of me. And you've brought me back from places of deep depression. Like you've been there when I needed you. And the hard conversation we had in that moment was, I don't need you to wait on me hand and foot. Yeah. And that was not something you wanted to hear. No. I recall you yelling in my face, "This is the way I am."
That was my response.
This is who I am. And that's how we ended up breaking up. Because I was like, well, then I don't want to have any part of you. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so that was definitely my answer. But that conversation was the catalyst to a really big change. Yeah, so what happened? Because I went home, I cried for a while, like a week. I talked to my mom a lot. And then I realized that you were right and I was being obstinate. And so the first thing I did was I found you in the hallway and I made sure that I solidified the connection with you because I didn't want to lose you. I wanted another chance and I knew it, but I couldn't tell you that. So I found you in the hallway and I remember it was a stairwell and I ran after you. I grabbed your arm and I was like, it's really important to me that we stay friends, right? Like you have a positive influence on my life and it's really important to me that we continue to be friends. And I find a lot of growth from my interactions with you. And if you're okay with that, that would make me happy. And you were like, yeah, and you were great. So that was the first step. Cute. Because crazy, but cute. Because I had a plan at that point. Like I knew, right? Like the case officer knows they're going to make their pitch down the line, right? So I knew down the line I was going to make a pitch. So I just needed to keep that first contact going. And then I started really reflecting on what you said, and I started putting in the work of not being demure, of making sure I put myself first. And I started going out by myself, which I hadn't been, right? And then we had the same circle of friends, so you would see me out and you would see the difference in my demeanor over time. So over time, you were able to make the assessment by me intentionally changing my behavior that I was really making a change. Right. I was really working on it. So then when I reached back out and started to make passes at you, you were more open to those. Gosh. When you showed up at my apartment with a deep cut top blouse. And the Transformers 2 movie. And a DVD. That's how we age. That's how we date ourselves right there. How could I say no? Yeah. But agree. Hard that conversations. Yep. Hard. And now, we've been married 13 years. We've known each other more than 16 years. So now hard conversations are something we do all the time. On a regular basis. Yeah. We know it has to get done. Yeah. And we don't really shy away from it. In fact, I think most people think that we're arguing when we're just talking. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because, there are times when we'll be with a group of people or we'll be talking and we'll have different opinions. And I have to remind myself that I am with you and not with my, parents or extended family. Like I'm with you. So when I disagree, I need to say it. I need to speak up. And if that's the beginning of a hard conversation, that's okay. Yeah. It's necessary, right? So speaking of hard conversations, there is so much going on right now that people don't like and they don't want to accept, but they're not willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
So what is one of those things for you? What irritates you when you read it in the headlines? What news articles, what current events come across your phone in the morning? Because we've talked about this before. You read the news first thing in the morning. I've got bleary eyes. Apparently it helps you tune in.
Yeah.
Just makes me angry. I would start my day angry every day. If I had to read the news first thing, I would start the day angry. But seriously though, what is the hard conversation? What's the thing that you see that you don't like every day?
I mean, right now, I think one of the hard conversations that the nation is hopefully having was, highlighted by Mitch McConnell recently, having whatever happened to him.
An episode,
right? Very publicly. Yeah. And then before that, several months ago, Dianne Feinstein was also out sick for months, and people were calling on her to please step down because her health was impeding. She sits on some very important committees, and when she's not there, nobody's there. Like there's no backfill for her, right, to make those decisions. So, the idea of, age, I think talking about, using age as a factor to prevent somebody from being in a job is a hard conversation, right? It doesn't feel right to people to, I think, and generally in this day and age, right? Like it doesn't feel right to people to say, you're too old.
Right. And there's this whole idea of ageism.
Yeah.
Now, to take a step back, what you're talking about is pretty recent news for us.
Yeah.
When Mitch McConnell was giving he was speaking to the press and giving just public comments, and then standing there behind his pedestal, he just kind of blanked out.
Yeah.
And it was the strangest thing to watch, too, because he's having a conversation, he's speaking in that octogenarian voice, and then he just stops.
Yeah.
And he keeps staring, and you can see he's got that 10,000-foot stare. It wasn't like a stroke or anything like that. I know some people joke and call it that. He just stopped for a very long time, clearly it was not a strategic pause.
Right.
It was a solid 12, 15, 25 seconds. And then his aides actually started saying, hey, Mitch, is there anything else you want to say? Or people tapping him on the shoulder, and they actually pulled him away from the microphone. But that was an episode. For sure, some break in cognitive process that was partially induced by age. Partially, I think people suspect that he had a concussion not long ago.
Yeah.
So a concussion is a bruise of the brain. The older we get, the longer bruises last.
Yeah, the longer it takes to heal.
But you're exactly right. Like, here is the leader of the Republican Party in the House, unable to communicate to the press.
Yeah.
That's an issue. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
There is no more senior member than him.
Yeah.
And he can't communicate. And then the same point with Feinstein, right?
Yeah.
Here you have somebody who is so critical to some of the most important subcommittees out there that without her presence, nothing happens.
Right.
And she's got, I think it was shingles that she was diagnosed with, so she was absentee.
Yeah.
I mean, these are responses that are induced in large part by age that are impeding their ability to execute the office that they're in.
Right.
So at what point are we allowed to have the hard conversation of saying, hey, maybe old people in positions of leadership in the House and the Congress and the Senate, maybe we shouldn't have them there. Maybe there should be a cap before you're too old.
Just like there's a minimum, right?
Just like there's a minimum.
And federal agencies have caps.
That's a fair point. Like, you can't be older than 38, I think, to apply to certain job categories.
Right. A lot of special agent positions, 37 is the cutoff. Yep. Department of State for Foreign Service, 60 is the cutoff. I think, so I think it's not unprecedented to have an age cutoff, just like you have an age minimum in the federal government. I also think that it's larger than just age, right? Because the people who are of older age in Congress are generally people who have also been in Congress like 20 plus years, right? So it's not just about age for me, it's about term limits, right? Like, how long are you going to sit in that seat when there are other people that are more representative of the demographic that you are trying to represent, right?
And they're competing, right? There are competitors out there trying to fleet up, trying to bring in fresh ideas, trying to bring in new levels of cooperation, trying to better represent the constituency.
Right.
But they just don't have the long-term support. They don't have the funding base. They don't have whatever that you've developed as a multi-generational, right, holder of a position in government.
Right. I mean, imagine if people knew that after 2 terms, right, let's say maybe not the House, but maybe the Senate, right? After 2 terms, that seat is up for grabs, right? It's open to everybody.
And 2 terms in Senate would be 12 years.
12 years, that's
12
a long
years,
time.
that's a third of a government career right there.
Yeah.
More than a third.
Yeah.
That's a long time to make an impact. 12
Right.
years is more than 2 presidents that's 2
Yes.
presidents if those 2 presidents both have consecutive terms.
Right.
That's a long time. You can step down. You can let someone new step in.
And you should.
And you should. I mean, consider how fast technology has changed, how fast society has changed.
Yeah.
In our adult life, right? And I would say our adult life didn't start until we were really 21. Speaking of adolescence, you're not really an adult at 18.
Yeah, well, they say your brain doesn't really stop growing until 25.
25, right?
Yeah.
So cognitively, you and I know you're not an adult when
Yeah.
people say you're an adult.
Right.
And I'd say most people who are over the age of 35 probably also admit, like, yeah, I was kind of a dumb shit at 22. I wasn't really a grown-up until I was 28.
Yep.
But either way, if you had the opportunity to bring in fresh adults, 30-year-olds, 32-year-olds, 35-year-olds, right, to replace the aged out 50-year-olds, 55-year-olds, what you're doing there is you're always having this steady rotation of new ideas, new talent, new collaborations, new resource pools, new networks that are always coming in, and still leaving plenty of time for people to have a really positive impact and move the government ball forward, move the social ball forward.
And it's not like those people, it's not like the people who, term out or age out can't still be involved somehow.
Correct.
Right? And we know for a fact that that's how it works in DC anyways, that, it's
a revolving door.
It's a revolving door. You're going to come back as a consultant in some way anyways.
Making more money.
Right. So, allow the younger generations to come in. I say younger generations because I believe that that's important, right? For me, the position of the elders is to, curate and mentor the youth, right?
Yeah.
The next in line for leadership. If you hold on to your position for 40 years, you're not doing that. You're not doing the job that you're supposed to be doing. So,
Yeah. To your point too, I don't think either of us is saying that we need to bring in youth, right? Like we're not saying bring in somebody who's unqualified and zealots.
Yeah, we're saying bring in the new blood.
Yeah, because zealots don't work well in Congress either, right? I do not like AOC. And I know a lot of people out there love AOC. She is a zealot. She is not trying to do what's in the best interest of the country. She's trying to do what this radical base that she represents because of her youth when she started. Right. It's just become like this permanent, constant Instagram battle, right? That's not what we're talking about.
And because there's definite, having experience is important.
Right.
Right?
Real world experience.
Real world experience.
And having a real dedication to the office that you serve.
Yes.
Is super important. You're not self-serving. You're serving a public office that supports a public constituency.
Yes, and you are supposed to represent that constituency.
So how do you feel then about the fact that like the 2 top contenders for president right now are both over, are they both over 75, both over 80?
They're both over 75.
Isn't that insane?
Yes.
And it's not just the United States.
Not happy about it.
If you look at the leadership right now in Latin America, if you look at the leadership across Asia, look at Xi Jinping, you're talking about powerful people, largely men, who are old, and of a generation that is not the modern day digital generation, right? We're talking about people who grew up in the Cold War. We're talking about people who grew up during the time when racial segregation was a thing, right? We're not talking about people who understand cybercrime and who understand, digital evolution and who understand the rise of the internet, right? We're talking about people who came up when things were still done on ink and paper and a courier delivered it.
Yeah, and I think
they're the ones leading the world.
Right, and I think that those are very demanding jobs. That Congress. If you work in Congress or if you're president, those are very demanding jobs. And you just can't overlook the fact that that kind of stress, the kind of hours that a president has to keep, right? It takes a toll. We saw Barack Obama go gray in like 4 years, like completely gray.
Do you remember Bush?
Yeah.
Bush had dirty blonde hair when he took office. He was an ancient old man when he died, when he left office. And it was insane how much of a toll the office took on him.
Yeah, it takes a toll on your health. And you just can't overlook the fact that when you're older, it's going to be more impactful. And are you really serving your country if you're going to leave a mess, right? Either by not being able to fulfill the duties, whether the public knows it or not, and possibly even dying in office and then leaving, your second in command, it's just messy.
Yeah.
Why?
It's really
Why do
interesting.
that?
It's funny because, and you and I think, have had this very kind of recent, intimate experience with this because we've started to see our own family members age.
Yeah.
And we've started to see their decline. Yeah. And I'm reminded of a guy in the private intel world that I was working with about 1.5 years ago. And his mother-in-law was dying rapidly. And his wife was very dedicated to her mother. So they were traveling to Cincinnati, I think it was, up from Florida to Cincinnati almost every weekend, right? To try to check in.
Yeah.
New health emergency. They needed to do something, right?
Yeah.
And he was commenting after weeks of this, how it's not helping anybody. The mother's life is being prolonged and she's in pain and discomfort and she's disoriented. His wife, the daughter of the mother, is not she's sleep deprived, she's stressed out, she's frustrated, she's disappointed. The whole staff at the hospital is also frustrated and angry and disappointed. He's struggling in his career and his business, trying to keep things running because he's managing a family emergency. For what? Yeah. Right? For what benefit? And you and I kind of see the same thing. We see the same thing with our own families. We see the same thing kind of playing out in the headlines too. Yeah. It's just, we think that they're different, and they're not that different. Yeah. Mitch McConnell is somebody's son. He's somebody's father. He's somebody's brother. He's somebody's grandparent. Yeah. Right? And right now, that family member is watching him become a public spectacle on headlines.
Yeah, we are mortal beings and life has a cycle, right? And we should respect that cycle. When you get to a certain age, you should fill the role of mentor. You should take it easy on yourself, right? Like, I know that you want to be involved and I respect all of your experience and your contribution, but it's not your time anymore, right? It's not your time for that position anymore. Let somebody else in, right? Yeah. And then you take the role of that stage of life that you're in, right? Yeah. Like, kick back, take it easy.
Or not even take it easy, but dedicate yourself in the capacity that you're now qualified to do.
Yes.
You're not qualified to be a mentor when you're 30 years old. I know there's life coaches out there who are like 28 years old. Yeah. So you can't coach shit at 28 years old. You barely qualify to coach softball or like t-ball, for crying out loud. You definitely can't coach somebody's life. High ticket coaches. I love seeing their ads on freaking Instagram. But my point is, you're not qualified to coach at 28. You might be qualified to coach at 48. You're certainly qualified to start giving some wisdom at 58, right? And by the time you're 68, you've seen it all. Yeah. Now all of a sudden you can give people really meaningful guidance, really meaningful counsel, right? Because you've had so much life, so much experience, so much secondhand experience. It's incredible what you can do at 68 that you simply can't do at 28. I remember being a kid. I was always in a hurry to grow up. I always wanted to be a grown-up, to make my own decisions, to pick my own food, stay up and go to sleep whenever I wanted to go to sleep, right? I remember wanting to grow up all the time. And then I remember being like 28, 29 and realizing that like I don't have any of the wasta or influence that I want to get shit done. And it was hard to have my hand slapped every time I had a creative idea at CIA and in the military and everything else. And then somehow at like 41, all of a sudden people trust my opinions. Yeah. They didn't trust my opinion at 29. They trust my opinion at 41, right? Even when I talk to people, you've seen me do this. I'll talk to a client or I'll talk to, somebody who comes across our radar. And you'll be like, oh, tell me about them. And I was like, oh, he's 32 years old. He's a fucking kid. Right? But other people are like 50 years old. I'm like, he's like 50 years old. She's 50 years old. They got to figure it out. Like they have a really good idea because they've had enough life experience to make sure it's a good idea. That 32-year-old may also have a good idea, but I'm still like, yeah, but I don't know if he's going to follow through.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to deliver. All right. We haven't had enough assessment data.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's all partially perspective too, because maybe a 30-year-old could be a life coach to like a 19-year-old. Right. I was going into
my 19-year-old.
I was going into a bathroom the other day, and it was an 80-year-old woman and a 60-year-old woman passing each other. And the 60-year-old woman made some comment about age, and the 80-year-old woman was like, "Oh, honey, you're so young. You just wait and see." And I was like,
"It still happens."
It still happens, right? To the 80-year-old woman, the 60-year-old woman's really young, right?
Yeah. So our hard conversation today, for everybody listening, is ageism really something that we need to worry about? Or is ageism actually, does it have some validity? That there really is a time and a place where somebody can be the wrong age for the role that they're in.
Right.
And we're not saying that, all 22-year-olds are idiots and all 60-year-olds are invalids. What we're saying is there's a season, there's a time, there's a place where you can optimize your contribution in line with your age and the experience that you've had and the knowledge base that you have. And there's also very real value in recognizing that there are places where just one generation behind you can come in and make a massive contribution.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a very fair but uncomfortable thing for people to admit to.
Right.
And whether or not anything is going to happen with that. I'm pretty sure Mitch McConnell's still going to be running the show. And we've got a lot more old white men still ahead of us in senior positions of government. I can almost guarantee you.
Well, and the other part of that hard conversation is how long should you hold on to power, right? At what point, no matter what age you are, should you let it go?
Washington turned it over. That's how the whole country started.
Yeah.
Right? That's
exactly.
We'll see. What's our question for today? Did we have a question from the SpyTribe today? All right, so our question for today is actually really interesting. Completely unrelated. Well, maybe it's not that unrelated. Maybe it is kind of a hard conversation. We'll find out. But the question that came in today was, are all CIA officers super fit like in the movies? I love your reaction. I feel like that answers the question. Thank you very much, folks. That's it for today.
So I think people have to remember that the CIA is a federal government agency. So I don't know if you've ever met anybody from another federal government agency, but it's varying levels of fitness. I do think that within case officers, so I mean, the CIA has so many roles, right? But within case officers, I do think that generally they are younger and fitter than possibly the remainder of the population.
I would actually say analysts are far more fit.
Really?
Oh yeah. I would actually give that to the DI personally.
Interesting.
But either way, you're right. Yeah, you see it, right?
I do see
it.
it.
When you've been on the inside of the building, you can see it. It's because the lifestyles of the different job categories have different demands.
Yeah.
So like so really the truth is, no, people are not fit at CIA.
Not any fitter than anywhere else.
Not any fitter than anywhere else. And you absolutely have, the pretty standard breakdown of your super fit people and your like weirdly obese people and then your average people in the middle.
Yeah.
And a big part of, I think, what plays into that is the lifestyle that comes from being in intelligence.
I think that's accurate. Yeah.
When you're young and you have no spouse, no kids, no obligations, you heal like a young person, you drink like a young person, you party like a young person, and you have copious amounts of time. Because basically, I mean, when I first started at 27, I was either in the office or in the gym.
Yeah.
In the office, in the gym, in bed. That's pretty much it. And I very quickly built my whole sleep schedule around optimizing my time in the office and my time working out. But then when you start getting serious with a partner, when you get married and you start raising a family and you go up in your career, you spend more time in the office, less time in the gym, less time in the bed.
Yep.
and things start to change. And especially for our field officers, people don't realize how hard a case officer's life is. Like a case officer
it's true.
who's running operations in the field, they're always on call.
Yeah.
They're on call with their boss, obviously, but they're also on call with their entire asset stable.
Yeah.
So any asset has problems at any time, any developmental calls in a favor at any time, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're eating fast food, they're traveling all the time, like they're drinking, they're smoking, they're doing whatever the asset wants to do to feel good.
Yeah.
And the gym goes out the window, rest goes out the window, whatever it takes to move the case forward, to progress the case forward.
Yep.
And, you know, I've seen case officers just, their bodies transform.
Yeah.
In, 12, 16 months? They go from being, you know, fit, honed bodies that came out of the military or came out of like college or came out of, you know, advanced education. And then all of a sudden they are like Stay Puft Marshmallow person. Struggling to just like keep everything on the rails.
You see them and they have like the same work shirt that they were hired in, except now the buttons are like pulling at each other and you're like, oh, like you don't realize that you've gained weight in these last, 18 months or so.
Yeah.
Like,
even paramilitary officers, right? And our paramilitary officers are those people who were special ops, special forces in the military. They basically get seconded or recruited into CIA to do very specific paramilitary tasks. However, for them to progress professionally, they basically do like 2 or 3 paramilitary tours, demanding special ops tours, and then they do 1 or 2 traditional tours. And then on those traditional tours, inevitably, they're like, wow, life with croissants and coffee and wine is really a whole hell of a lot easier than life with MREs and like, jungle BDUs. And then they go back to the paramilitary units and they've got an extra 12 or 15 pounds they're carrying. And then they got to get that, they got to lose it. Yeah. And what's hard is, you and I started CIA at 27. 3 tours in, you're 37 years old, right? 37 years old, it's a lot harder to turn your body around than 27, right? 4 tours, 5 tours, all of a sudden now you're 46 years old. Really hard to turn your body around after you've had some nasty stuff from traveling the world. So the short answer is no, not everybody's fit. I think it's also worth noting, though, that when you're undercover, there's lots of reasons to choose someone who's not fit to be a certain undercover role. Oh, yeah. There's reasons to pick somebody who's, has anxiety or somebody who has even mild Asperger's. There's the diversity that exists inside CIA is really quite shocking.
And it's necessary.
And it's necessary because you really do have to pick the right tool for the operation.
Yes.
Right? I need a heavyset African-American person who studied English at a state college and, who is an avid fan of cribbage. There he is. And now he's on ops, right? Now he's the one doing this thing. And now, I need a super fit female who speaks Arabic, but who also whatever, right? And then boom, and you put them where you need them to be. You have to have a super diverse pool of talent to be able to pull that. I'm continuing to riff on this. Thank you for being patient with me. But it reminds me of all of the current CIA ads that are out there that make me laugh.
Oh, yeah?
Because CIA has this really horrible ad campaign going on. And it's been going on for probably 2 or 3 years now. You can tell that they've had issues with recruitment and issues with retention.
Yes.
And you see it because they have this push in their advertising right now that's like highlighting diversity and woke culture and like all that stuff.
Whatever seems popular at the moment.
Yeah, they're just pushing it out there. Like, here's rainbow flags, and here's lesbian couples, and here's a Asian guy in a wheelchair with glasses, whatever. They're just pushing all this stuff out there, and you can tell that they're trying to represent like that they're a diverse workforce. I'm like, guys, you actually are a diverse workforce. So why change your advertising at all? Like, you've always been able to attract incredibly diverse, talented people because they value their intelligence, they value the risk, they value the challenge, they value serving the American people. They value something so much more than the color of their skin or the status of their sexual identity.
Yeah, the personality traits that they're looking for in a good officer transcend gender, transcends race, transcends background.
And because of that, you get such a diverse pool of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's such a strong lesson to all of us, especially as Americans, where it's like, we don't have to subdivide ourselves into 5,000 labels.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's like, it reminds me of like the church system, where it's like, you can't just be Protestant, you have to be Presbyterian of this sect, of this belief system, whatever. It's like, that's what I feel like sometimes as an American. It's like, you have to be, conservative or liberal, and you have to be, extreme left or extreme right, and then what's your news source, and who's your this and who's your that, and how do you identify, and what state are you in, and do you believe in gay marriage? It's like, can't I just like love my country and try to do a good job and hope that my kids grow up and be contributing members of society? That's the kind of American flag I carry. Do you still accept me?
No, I agree with you. I think that, it's important to accept people at face value when you meet them. And when we start trying to box everybody in and what is your pronoun and all that, and I'm, why don't you just have the conversation with me, right? If you call me the wrong pronoun, it's okay.
I don't hate you for it.
I don't hate you for it, because you know what? I grew up, my name is Jihi. You know how many times that still to this day, nobody says it right. It's fine. I'm not going to get upset, right? If you don't know what my religion is, you don't know what my gender, you don't know my orientation, that's fine.
Yeah.
No, I will not be offended.
We used to make friends without those things.
Yeah.
Now you need a name tag this long to be able to communicate who you are.
Like, let's just find out through dialogue.
Yeah.
I promise not to be offended. I promise not to keep an open mind.
If you'll do the same thing.
If you'll do the same thing.
And then it'll be a happy conversation, not a hard conversation.
Yeah. Exactly.
Thank you very much, folks, for joining us again for an awesome conversation. Please leave your comments below. Let us know what you liked. Let us know what you didn't like. Leave your hate mail if you want to leave your hate mail. We don't really care. We're thick enough skinned for it. But we absolutely want to know, what questions do you have for us? What do you want us to talk about? What do you want us to dig into more? We've had a fantastic opportunity here to sit with you, to talk with each other. High five. And we want to keep this going. So we love your engagement. We really appreciate your support. Leave your comments below, and we will talk to you soon.
Freedom! So fresh song.